It started with a voice that cracked the silence like thunder over glass. "Move your boat, now!" Jackson Cole was crouched near his trailer, tightening the last bolt when the words sliced through the morning air. He looked up slowly, puzzled. This early, he expected birdsong, maybe a breeze. Not a woman storming up like she had sirens in her shoes. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the man she was scolding owned every drop of the lake behind him. And her little fishing club? It was floating on borrowed time. Let's take a step back. The lake was called Echo Pines, a wide, still stretch of water tucked just outside the small town of Ashbrook, somewhere in rural Virginia. It wasn't a place most folks had heard of. You wouldn't find it in a travel guide. But for the people who grew up around it, Echo Pines meant summer mornings, skipping stones, and catching catfish with your dad before breakfast. That morning, the world felt like it hadn't quite woken up yet. The trees were still draped in mist. The sky wore the soft gray of pre-dawn. And the lake so still it looked painted weighted. Then came the truck. It was old. Sky blue, dented along the sides, with a gentle rumble that spoke of years on back roads. Its tires crunched slowly through the gravel lot, easing toward the edge of the lake like it belonged there. And in the driver's seat sat Jackson. Jackson was the kind of man who rarely raised his voice. Mid to late 40s, broad-shouldered but not showy. His beard was beginning to silver, especially near the chin. His boots had dust from old places on them. And he had the calm air of someone who knew how to build things and when to walk away from them. He grew up in Ashbrook. Back when the lake wasn't fenced, when families brought coolers and kids came barefoot. His father, Henry, used to bring him here before sunrise. Those memories were carved into him like initials in a tree trunk. Years later, after Henry passed, Jackson moved to Richmond for work. He did well, saved up, lived quiet. Then, 3 years ago, he came back and bought the lake through a land trust deal. Just like that. No signs, no speeches. Just a quiet return to the place that raised him. He didn't brag about it. Didn't announce it to the neighborhood. He just came back now and then to fish, to breathe, to remember. Today was supposed to be one of those days. He'd spent most of the night getting his old aluminum boat ready, wiping it down, organizing his tackle box, filling a flask with strong black coffee. No one knew he was coming. That was the point. Then she showed up, mid-50s, hair clipped short and sprayed stiff, sunglasses already on her head even though the sun hadn't cleared the ridge yet. She wore sandals that slapped the gravel with every step and a polo shirt that screamed authority. In one hand was a clipboard, in the other, a pen she gripped like a dagger. "You can't park here," she barked again. Jackson turned, slowly. "I'm sorry, this parking lot is for residents only. You'll need to move that boat." He placed his wrench on the trailer with quiet care and stood up, not confrontational, just steady. "Good morning," he said. "Do you live here?" "I'm on the HOA board," she snapped, like it was a sheriff's badge. "And I know everyone who's on the lake use list. You're not one of them." He looked around. No other cars, no signs. Just fog, trees, and water. "I didn't see a notice," Jackson said. "There's one nailed up near the pavilion," she shot back. "You must have missed it." Jackson nodded. "I've fished here plenty of times. Never been a problem." "Well, it is now," she snapped, smacking her pen against the clipboard. "Either you move that boat or I'm calling this in." Jackson took a breath, slow and measured. "May I ask your name?" "Susan Halcroft," she replied, straightening her back. "And yours?" "Jackson Cole." She scribbled on the page. "Is that boat registered to you?" "It is." "Well, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice dripping with polite venom, "you may not be aware of the rules, but this isn't a public lake. This area is reserved for members of the Echo Pines Fishing Club and their supervised guests. We've had issues before: trash, broken benches, people treating the lake like a dumping ground. He watched her carefully. There was something about how she said people that didn't sit right. He didn't say it aloud, but he heard it, the judgment baked into her tone. She didn't ask who he was, she assumed. "I'm not breaking anything," he said simply. "Just here to fish." "You need to leave," she said coldly. Now, Jackson looked down at the gravel, then back to the lake. "You sure you want to push this?" he asked. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "You might want to double-check your information," he said evenly. "I think you're mistaken about who owns this lake." She actually laughed, high and sharp. "What, are you trying to scare me? Do you know how long I've lived here?" Jackson didn't move. "Do you know who bought this lake 3 years ago? Who maintains it, pays the property taxes, signed off on your fishing club's access?" There just for a second, a flicker of doubt crossed her face, but she covered it up fast. "You're bluffing," she said. Jackson walked back to his trailer and clipped the safety line onto the boat. "Hitch." "All right," he said calmly. "You do what you have to do." "I will," she hissed. "You'll be hearing from the board." But Jackson wasn't bluffing. And Susan Halcroft had just lit a match she couldn't control. By 9 o'clock, Jackson was on the water. The boat drifted like a feather across the eastern edge of the lake, just brushing the reeds. His fishing line danced quietly on the surface. He wasn't rushing, wasn't even trying to catch anything. It was enough just to be here. The air was cool, the water calm. It was perfect. Then came the whine of tires on gravel. Jackson turned his head. A white golf cart was rattling down the slope toward the dock. Even at a distance, he knew who it was. Same stiff posture. Same quick, angry steps. Susan. And this time she wasn't alone. A younger man sat beside her, maybe mid-20s, wearing a blue jacket with a radio clipped to the front. Security. Hired muscle. They stopped at the dock. Susan got out, legs apart like she was standing in court. "Jackson Cole!" She yelled across the water. "This is your final warning." Jackson reeled in his line slowly, turned his chair, raised his coffee cup. "Morning again, Susan. I've called the sheriff's office. You are in violation of HOA regulation. Leave immediately." The young man leaned in, whispered something. She shook her head sharply. Jackson sat still, calm. "That man with you," he called out. "He got a badge or just a radio?" Susan stiffened. "That's not your concern." "Well," Jackson replied, voice like steady wood, "if you're going to accuse someone of trespassing, you might want to make sure you're not the one standing on private land." The security guy stepped forward, hesitating. "Sir, can I ask what you're doing here?" Jackson nodded once. "Fishing." "Are you a resident of Echo Pines?" "No." "Then I'm going to have to ask you to come ashore." Jackson. Cole didn't flinch. As the young man in the blue windbreaker took a few cautious steps toward the dock, Jackson sat perfectly still in his fishing chair, the rod resting loosely in his hand, line dancing across the water like nothing had changed. He slowly pulled his tackle box closer to his feet, snapped it open, and began organizing the lures, not out of necessity, but to keep his hands moving while the air thickened with tension. "You ever hear of Westbridge Holdings?" Jackson asked, eyes not leaving the lake. The guard hesitated. "Can't say that I have." "Figures," Jackson muttered, shifting a few hooks into place. "They're a private trust. Bought this lake and the surrounding land 3 years ago. Fully owned, managed, maintained. Every bush, every plank of this dock, even the gravel you drove in on." The guard looked back at Susan, who stood stiffly at the edge of the dock, arms crossed like iron rods. Jackson finally looked up. "I'm the sole trustee." Susan let out a laugh, tight, brittle, and mean. "And we're just supposed to believe that?" Jackson smiled slow and unfazed. "Don't really care if you believe it or not." The paperwork's on file at the county office. Greenridge Records Department. Public record. Feel free to drive down there and read it yourself." The guard shifted uncomfortably again, glancing between Susan and the calm man on the boat. The lake's surface still shimmered softly behind Jackson, a backdrop too serene for the firestorm building around. "Do you have ID on you?" the guard asked gently. "In the truck," Jackson replied. "But I'll show it to the deputy when he gets here. That is who you called, right?" Susan didn't answer. Her eyes narrowed. Her grip on the clipboard tightened. The guard looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Look, I'm just doing my job, and I'm just fishing," Jackson said. That should have ended it. But Susan wasn't one to back off. "This lake has been part of our community for decades," she snapped, stepping forward. "You think just because some shell company signed some papers, you get to act like you own the place? Stir things up? Disrupt our peace?" Jackson's tone didn't change. "Ma'am, I didn't come looking for a problem. You did." "I was here, minding my own." Her cheeks flushed red. "You know what?" she snapped. "Fine, let's let the sheriff sort it out. But don't expect sympathy when they get here." Jackson leaned back in his seat, eyes on the horizon. "Not looking for sympathy," he said. "Just came for some peace and quiet." But there was no peace now. Not in the water, not in the air, not in her face, because this wasn't about a boat anymore. It was about control, and she was losing hers. By the time Jackson packed up his gear that afternoon, the sun had climbed high and hot, pushing the temperature into the 80s. He loaded his boat with the same calm care he had launched it, but there was a different weight behind every motion, something simmering just beneath the skin. The drive home was only about 10 minutes, down a winding back road lined with oaks and rusted wire fences. The truck creaked as it hit every dip and pothole, and Jackson said nothing the entire ride. Just let the silence fill the cabin like steam rising off hot asphalt. His house stood alone at the end of a gravel driveway, simple, green-painted wood with white trim that had begun to fade. No flashy cars, no manicured lawn. Just a porch with 2 chairs and a dog named Duke waiting on the steps. The old lab barked once as Jackson pulled in, tail wagging. Jackson gave him a small wave and the ghost of a smile, but didn't linger. He stepped through the front door, kicked off his boots, and let the screen door sigh closed behind him. He moved like someone carrying more than tools, like the weight of memory was strapped to his back. His keys clinked against the hook on the wall. He walked past the hallway mirror, ignored his reflection, and reached for the wooden shelf near the entrance. There, nestled between an old compass and a faded baseball cap, was a photo frame. The glass was scratched. The edges were worn. He picked it up. The picture inside showed a younger version of his father, Henry Cole, barefoot, jeans rolled to the calf, grinning like a fool as he held up a fat trout. Jackson, maybe 10, stood next to him with muddy shoes and crooked teeth, looking up at the fish like it was a prize from the heavens. "Dad," Jackson muttered, "you'd have handled her better than I did." He set the picture down with care and poured himself a tall glass of iced tea. No sugar, just cold and bitter. He sat at the kitchen table, the light slanting in through the curtains, painting lines across the wood. He didn't move for a while, didn't sip, didn't speak. Just thought about Susan, about how easily she'd written his name down, about how quickly she assumed the worst. Like his presence was a problem, like his calmness was a threat. She hadn't asked who he was, she didn't care. And Jackson had felt that kind of dismissal before. He stood up slowly, moved to the hallway, and opened the bottom drawer of an old filing cabinet. Inside was a blue folder marked Echo Pines Title and Access Agreements. He placed it on the table, opened it. There it was, deed transfer from the original landowners. Signatures from Westbridge Holdings. his name listed clearly as trustee. An agreement between the HOA and the trust, allowing the local fishing club conditional use of the lake, renewable each year. He checked the dates. No renewal in over 10 months. They forgot, he whispered to himself. They really forgot. Who they were dealing with. The lake had never been public. Never. The previous owners had offered access out of kindness. Jackson's father had helped put that understanding in place, back when handshakes meant more than paperwork. His father believed in community as long as it respected the space. But that handshake, it had faded. After Henry passed, those friendly neighbors turned silent, cold. A few polite waves, nothing more. And Susan? Susan had never once looked Jackson in the eye. He scanned the papers again, slower this time. No loopholes, no technicalities. The access was granted as a courtesy, not a right. If he wanted to, he could revoke it all right now. Still, that wasn't Jackson's way. He didn't move fast. He didn't make decisions out of spite. He believed in giving people a chance to do the right thing. But this wasn't just about a woman being rude. It was about something bigger. Entitlement, assumptions, respect. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't touched in years. Lang? He said when the voice answered. Jackson? Came the surprised reply. Been a while. Yeah, listen, I need a favor. Can you pull up the old HOA access file from 3 years ago? Specifically the section about fishing club permissions. There was a pause. I've got the hard copy, Jackson added. But I want to double-check a few things with you. No rush, Lang said. You thinking of making a move? I'm thinking, Jackson said. It's time I took a hard look at who's been walking all over what my father left behind. He hung up. He didn't know it yet, but the storm brewing behind the neighborhood gates was only just beginning. Early Monday morning, Jackson drove down to the Greenridge County Recorder's office. He didn't need to. He had all the paperwork at home. But something in his gut said this needed to be done right, on record, clean, bulletproof. He waited at the front counter while a young clerk in glasses typed in the parcel number. A few moments later, the monitor blinked to life. There it was, his name, the land description, a scanned copy of the deed. Echo Pines Lake, the dock, the surrounding woods. All of it undisputed. No easements, no community ownership. No shared claims. Held entirely under Westbridge Holdings Trust. Looks like everything's in order, the clerk said cheerfully. Jackson nodded once. That's what I needed. He stepped out into the sun, blinking as the warmth hit him full on. He wasn't here for revenge, not really. He just wanted people to remember something simple. Respect the water. Respect the ones who care for it. Back home, Jackson pulled into his gravel driveway. The tires crunched slow and steady, echoing across the quiet front yard. His dog Duke padded down the porch steps to meet him, tail wagging once, then twice. Jackson reached down to scratch behind the old lab's ears before heading inside. The house was still, modest, the kind of place built for living, not for showing off. The walls were painted soft earth tones, the furniture simple and worn from years of honest use. It was the kind of home that held warmth in the wood and history in the floorboards. He walked to the kitchen, opened his laptop, and stared at the FASA, blinking cursor on a blank document. Then he began to type. His words were precise, unemotional, clean. He didn't waste space with anger or insult. The letter was addressed directly to the Echo Pines Homeowners Association and its full board. He cited the terms of the original agreement, how access to the lake was never permanent, how it required renewal every year, how no such request had been submitted for the current term. He reminded them the land was privately owned under Westbridge Holdings, and that their fishing club's use was a conditional privilege, not a right. Then, in clear and professional language, he ended it. Effective immediately. All public and HOA access to Echo Pines Lake is suspended until further notice. No threats, no emotion, just truth. Legally reinforced and sealed with documentation. He attached scanned copies of the deed, the original HOA agreement, and a notarized statement confirming his position as trustee of the trust. By the time he hit print, the letter read like a courtroom hammer falling. He slid it and the supporting documents into a thick manila envelope and headed back out, Duke watching from the front step as the truck pulled away again. The HOA office sat behind a line of trimmed hedges just inside the main gates of Echo Pines, a beige, one-story building that looked more like a dental clinic than a center of neighborhood governance. The parking lot was nearly empty, just 2 cars parked in crooked lines near the front entrance. Jackson didn't hesitate. He walked straight inside. At the reception desk, a young woman with a headset glanced up, startled. "Can I help you?" Without a word, Jackson handed her the envelope. She took it with both hands like it might explode. "Would you like a receipt?" He looked her in the eyes, calm, steady. "Just make sure Susan gets it." That evening, Jackson sat on his porch, Duke stretched out beside him like a warm rug. The sun was sliding behind the treetops, casting gold across the yard. A breeze moved the grass in slow waves. For the first time in days, Jackson felt a flicker of stillness. Then his phone rang, unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Cole?" a man's voice asked. "This is Brian Kellner. I'm the acting president of the Echo Pines HOA board. We, received your letter today." Jackson didn't respond. Brian Kellner cleared his throat. "Look, we'd like to talk. Maybe this is a misunderstanding. No need to escalate things further." "There's nothing escalated," Jackson replied calmly. "The agreement wasn't renewed. Your people continued using the lake without permission. All I've done is restore the boundaries as they were meant to be." "I understand," Brian said quickly. "But cutting off the community entirely, some folks aren't going to take that well. They've been using that lake for years." "And I haven't stopped them," Jackson said. "Until Saturday. Until your board member marched up and treated me like a trespasser on my own land." There was a pause on the line. Would you be open to a meeting?" Brian asked. "Maybe we can find some kind of compromise." Jackson took a slow sip of water. "Let's see," he said, "how folks handle a little humility first." He ended the call without waiting for a reply. The letter hit harder than Jackson expected. By Wednesday morning, the ripple had become a wave. At the grocery store, eyes followed him down every aisle. First confusion, then recognition, then whispers behind shopping carts. The emails came first, short, passive-aggressive, written in that clipped tone people use when they're furious but trying to sound polite. Lines like, "Surely there's been some mistake," or "It's disappointing to see community resources politicized." Then the calls. Blocked numbers. Old acquaintances he hadn't spoken to in years. But what struck him most were the quiet voices. At the hardware store, a man in a grease-stained ball cap and worn overalls stepped into the aisle near the screws and washers. "You Jackson?" The man asked. "I am," Jackson said cautiously. The man held out his hand. "Name's Bill Mercer. I live on Valley Ridge. Been here near 20 years. Heard what happened." Jackson shook his hand but said nothing. "Just wanted you to know," Bill continued. "Not all of us feel the way Susan does. She's been trying to run this whole place like her own personal empire." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "She told my wife our porch chairs weren't aesthetically appropriate." Bill chuckled bitterly. "Said the color clashed with the HOA guidelines. Can you believe that? A chair is a chair. You sit on it, not judge it." Jackson let out the faintest laugh. "I'll remember that." At the post office, someone had slipped an unsigned note into his P.O. box. "She doesn't speak for all of us." At the gas Station, a middle-aged woman waved shyly as she filled up her SUV, then quickly looked away when Jackson didn't wave back. They were feeling him out, testing the current, seeing which way the wind was blowing. Not everyone wanted to throw punches, but not everyone wanted peace either. That afternoon, Jackson opened his mailbox and found a single sheet of white paper. No envelope, no return address. Just bold black letters across the top. Local man shuts down lake access. Retaliation or power grab. Beneath the headline was a short, sneering paragraph accusing him of using his position to punish the community. It claimed he was wielding land ownership like a sword, disrupting peace, and overstepping his bounds. There was no author, no contact, no accountability. But Jackson didn't need a signature to know who wrote it. He stood on his porch, reading it slowly. Then he folded it in half and tossed it into the trash bin by the door. That evening, Jackson leashed Duke and walked the long gravel path down to the water. The trail crunched underfoot, soft and damp from the morning's dew. The air smelled of pine and distant wood smoke. Near the shoreline, he passed a couple sitting on rocks with their fishing rods resting in silence. They didn't speak, just watched him. Jackson nodded politely. They said nothing. Back home, he sat on the porch once more. Sun dipping low, dog at his feet, letter already written. Boundaries drawn. He didn't want to fight. He hadn't asked for one, but now it was here. The phone rang again the next morning. Jackson Cole glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He thought about ignoring it, then changed his mind and picked up. Hello? Hi, Mr. Cole. A soft young woman's voice came through. This is Lauren Shepard. I live on Lilac Bend Lane. I'm on the HOA board. Just joined, actually, after a few folks stepped down last month. Jackson stayed silent, waiting. I just wanted to apologize, Lauren said. I wasn't there Saturday, but I heard what happened. Susan doesn't speak for all of us. And honestly, some of us are really embarrassed. That's good to know, Jackson replied, voice steady. There's talk of an emergency board meeting, she continued. Some members want to push back, maybe reverse your decision. Others are hoping we can reach out and work out a new agreement. I'm not looking to negotiate, Jackson said. Lauren paused. Then, what are you looking for? Respect. She hesitated, then said quietly, understood. The call ended soon after. But Jackson knew calls like that were just the beginning. Some people were going to go quietly, but others would drag it into a full scene before they let go of their grip. And that scene was already building. By Friday morning, the tension in Echo Pines had thickened into something you could taste in the air. The letter Jackson had delivered had done more than revoke access. It had set the neighborhood spinning. Copies were passed around backyard barbecues like wildfire, forwarded through family group chats and email chains, whispered about during evening dog walks, and passed between porch neighbors who hadn't spoken in weeks. Every member of the Echo Pines Fishing Club had seen it by now, and no one had a neutral opinion. Inside the HO, a building, a cramped, tan-colored room that still smelled faintly of printer toner and air freshener tempers stirred like dust in sunlight. The community meeting room wasn't built for tension. Beige walls, folding chairs, a whiteboard with faded marker streaks, everything in it was meant for dull, quiet votes on hedge trimming and summer cookouts. But today, it was a powder keg. Susan Halcroft stood at the head of the table, arms folded, shoulders rigid. Her mouth was a tight line, her clipboard nowhere to be seen for once. She hadn't spoken, not officially, but her fury was practically humming off her skin. Brian Kellner sat beside her, slouched forward, rubbing the bridge of his nose like it was trying to escape his face. We've all read the letter, Brian finally said, his voice low and worn thin. And whether we like it or not, Jackson Cole is within his rights. A murmur went around the table. Don Keeling, one of the older board members with a slow drawl and permanent scowl, shifted in his seat. So that's it? We just let him lock us out of the lake like we're squatters? Susan's eyes burned. He's trying to make a point. That much is clear. No, Lauren said from the far end of the table, her tone firm. He's asking for something basic. He's asking for respect. And after what happened on Saturday, I don't think he's out of line. Susan turned sharply toward her. Are you taking his side? Lauren didn't flinch. I'm taking the side of the facts. The agreement expired. We didn't renew it. That's on us. But this affects the whole community. Susan snapped. That lake has been part of Ecopines for decades. Families fish there. Kids swim in the summer. He can't just rip it away because he got his feelings hurt. Brian looked up. This didn't start because of feelings. It started when you accused a man of trespassing on land he owns. Silence fell like a dropped brick. For a moment, no one spoke. Meanwhile, just down the road, Jackson stood at the edge of the lake with a clipboard of his own. Not to monitor, not to patrol, just to take inventory. He walked the perimeter of the dock, noting broken fence slats that had gone unrepaired for months. Near the fire pit, 2 benches sat cracked and splintered, one half buried in the soil. Candy wrappers and beer cans littered the brush near the waterline. According to the agreement, the HOA had been responsible for maintaining these areas. They hadn't done it, not in over a year. A pickup truck pulled up behind him, slowing near the trail. The window rolled down. Bill Mercer leaned out, a smirk playing on his face. You sure you want to poke this hornet's nest? He asked. Jackson didn't turn around. I didn't poke anything. I just stopped letting people stomp through my yard without asking. Bill laughed, then drove off. That afternoon, a notice went out. Printed on HOA letterhead, it was pinned to the community bulletin board, slipped into mailboxes in plastic sleeves to protect it from the rain, and emailed to every resident on the list. Effective immediately, public access to Ecopines Lake is suspended. All use of the dock, shoreline, or greenbelt is prohibited pending review and renegotiation with Westbridge Holdings. Violations may result in trespassing enforcement. The deal. Reaction? Instant. A woman in her 60s stormed into the HOA office, demanding to know who gave this man the right. Teenagers gathered at the trail entrance, arguing with parents who told them they couldn't fish that weekend. Online neighborhood forums exploded. Threads labeled lake drama multiplied. Wild theories flew. One post even claimed Jackson was secretly planning to sell the lake to a developer, turn it into a gated resort. No one could say where that rumor started, but it spread. That night, Jackson sat on the porch again. Duke lay beside him, twitching in his sleep. The sky was clear. Stars peeked through the tree line. A breeze stirred the wind chimes on the far corner of the roof. Then a knock came, light, careful. Lauren stood at the edge of the porch steps, hands at her sides, her expression unreadable. I wanted to check in, she said. Jackson nodded once. You're braver than most. Lauren smiled faintly. I've had worse neighbors. You got a minute? He motioned for her to sit in the chair beside him. She didn't sit right away. I also came to ask if you'd speak at the next community meeting. Officially, he raised an eyebrow. Say. What? Whatever you want them to hear, she said. Right now, all they know is Susan's version. They don't know yours. Jackson leaned back slightly, gaze drifting up to the stars. After a moment, he nodded. All right. I'll come, Lauren exhaled. Good. They need to hear from you. Not just about the lake. About you. The meeting was set for the following Thursday. But by Sunday afternoon, word had spread like wildfire. When Jackson arrived at the community center that evening, he was stunned. The room was full. Folding chairs had been dragged in from every storage closet. People stood along the walls. Some even crowded outside the open double doors, craning to hear. There hadn't been a turnout like this in years. Not for budgets, not for the 4th of July, but tonight, everyone came. Jackson stood near the front, off to the side, no podium. No notes, just jeans, a button-up shirt, and a quiet presence. Susan sat front and center, arms folded tight, jaw clenched. Behind her were rows of faces, some familiar, some not. Some looked away when he made eye contact. Brian Kellner stood at the front of the crowded community hall, adjusting his glasses nervously. The air buzzed with anticipation and rustling folding chairs. He cleared his throat, tapping the microphone even though it wasn't plugged in. "Thank you all for coming," he said, voice thin but respectful. "This wasn't a scheduled meeting, but after everything that's happened, it felt necessary. Mr. Jackson Cole has agreed to speak tonight. I'd ask that we all keep things civil. No interruptions." He stepped aside. Jackson took a slow breath and walked forward, every step silent, but firm. He didn't head for the center stage. Just stood slightly off to the side, hands at his sides, no notes, no podium. His button-down shirt was ironed, his jeans clean. But there was nothing performative about him. He waited a moment before speaking, letting the room settle, letting eyes meet his. "My father used to bring me to this lake when I was 10, he began. His voice was quiet, even. The room leaned in, before there were gates, before there were rules, before this neighborhood was even an idea on a drawing board. A few heads tilted. A murmur passed through the crowd. "We used to fish in the mornings," he continued, "and cook on the shore by noon. That's where I learned to tie my first line. Not in a class, not on YouTube, right here. With my hands shaking and my dad laughing." Someone in the back whispered something, then silence again. "I bought this lake 3 years ago through a trust. My dad's name is on that trust. I kept the lake open to the community, no fees, no paperwork, just the quiet expectation that it be treated with care." He paused, not because he was unsure, but to let the weight land. "But last Saturday," he glanced toward the crowd, catching a few eyes before continuing, "someone came up to me, told me to leave, threatened to call the police. Accused me of trespassing." He let that hang there. "That's not a rule problem. That's a respect problem." A woman in the back raised her hand. She didn't wait to be called on. "She didn't know who you were," the woman said. Jackson looked at her directly. She didn't ask. Silenced out, no one tried to argue. "This isn't about punishing anybody," Jackson said. "It's about accountability. This lake's been used for years without renewal, without maintenance, and frankly, without thought to who's behind it, who's paying the taxes, who's fixing the dock." He stepped back slightly, not retreating, just giving the words space to settle. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said, "but I won't apologize for asking to be treated like I belong." That last line struck harder than expected. A few people looked down. One woman whispered to her husband and dabbed at her eyes. Susan Halcroft stood up. Her voice was tight. "Why didn't you come to us? Why shut everyone out?" Jackson met her gaze, steady as stone. "You came to me first." With a clipboard and a threat, she opened her mouth, then closed it. Sat back down slowly. Brian Kellner stepped forward again. "We'll now open the floor to comments. Please keep it respectful." Hands flew up. An older man in a fishing hat was first. "Look, I don't care who owns what. That lake is part of this neighborhood's life. My grandson caught his first fish there." Jackson nodded. "Then maybe the neighborhood should care enough to respect the man who's been keeping it open all this time." A younger woman raised her hand. "Would you consider renewing the agreement if the HOA commits to maintenance? Real oversight? A better structure?" Jackson didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, then the room. He could feel the tone shifting, the anger thinning into something else. "I'll consider it," he said. "But not until I know folks understand this isn't just property. It's personal." By the time the meeting ended, the mood had softened. No one shouted, no doors slammed. People left quietly, thoughtful. And over the next few days, something shifted in Echo Pines. No more anonymous flyers. No calls in the middle of the night. No teens fishing in the shadows. The lake was still again. Just water and wind. Jackson didn't expect an apology from Susan, and he didn't get one, but she stepped back. The clipboard vanished. Word spread that she had resigned from the board, citing personal matters. Everyone knew why. Saturday morning, Jackson returned to the dock with a toolbox and a half-empty bucket of paint. Duke trotted beside him, tail thumping with each step. The benches were still cracked, the fencing still leaned. But Jackson didn't feel bitter. He wasn't here to fix things for the neighborhood. He was here for himself, for his father. Halfway through repairing a plank, he heard the crunch of gravel behind him. "You need a hand?" He turned. Lauren stood there in jeans and a hoodie, sleeves already pushed up. In one hand, she held a bag of screws. In the other, a cordless drill. Jackson smiled. "You know how to use that thing?" "I do," she grinned. "You'd be shocked how much paperwork I've fixed with this drill." He chuckled and nodded toward the bench. "Be my guest." They worked in quiet harmony. No idle chatter. Just the sound of tools and the occasional bird call. 20 minutes passed. Then Lauren spoke. "There are people who want to make things right, you know." Jackson didn't look up. "Takes more than good intentions." "I know," she said. "That's why I've been working with the new board. We're drafting a revised agreement, real cleanup schedules, maintenance plans, a rotating oversight committee, fair rules, fair expectations." He stopped what he was doing and met her eyes. "No more clipboards and threats?" "No more," she promised. "And if someone breaks the rules, we handle it. You don't get dragged into it." Jackson nodded. "I'll read it when it's ready." Later that afternoon, Bill Mercer returned. But this time, he wasn't alone. His teenage grandson, Lucas, stood beside him, trash bag in one hand, gloves in the other. "We figured we'd help out," Bill said. "Might not fix everything, but it's a start." Jackson didn't say much, just handed the boy a rake and pointed toward the path. By sundown, the dock looked new again. The benches were solid. The shoreline was clean. And for the first time since the chaos began, Jackson felt something he hadn't in weeks: relief. The next morning at church, a few heads turned as Jackson walked in. Some nodded politely. One woman leaned toward him and whispered, "That lake's lucky to have you." He nodded, even though he didn't know her name. After the service, a tall man in glasses approached him in the parking lot. "You're Jackson, right?" he asked. "I live over on Elmwood. Just wanted to say, my kid caught his first fish at your lake last summer. I never got to thank you for keeping it open." Jackson didn't need the thanks, but it meant something, because it came without being forced. That evening, he walked the trail with Duke. The sun dipped low, crickets hummed. The air smelled of grass and pine. He thought of his father, of mornings with tangled fishing lines and wood smoke on flannel, of the way his dad used to say, "People don't always see the value in something until it's nearly gone." Now he understood. But Jackson had also learned something deeper. Respect isn't granted through meetings or shouted into place. It's earned one plank at a time, one boundary at a time, one conversation at a time. A week later, Jackson stood at the edge of the lake, the sunrise streaking orange across the surface. He didn't bring a fishing rod. He didn't need one. Under his arm was a plastic folder. Inside, the revised access agreement. Lauren and the new board had put in the work. This time it had teeth. scheduled maintenance days, a 3-strike policy for littering, annual renewal, no auto-renewals, no assumptions, required orientation for all club members, covering the lakes. History and ownership. Jackson didn't do it to control people. He didn't do it for the apology that never came. He did it because when people walk all over something sacred, it doesn't just hurt the place. It changes you. And Jackson wasn't going to let one woman's entitlement rewrite the legacy that Lake stood for. Later that day, he walked into the HOA clubhouse. The new board sat waiting. A few familiar faces, some warm, some unsure, none hostile. He signed the last page. Lauren leaned in. "We're going to do better." Jackson nodded. "I'll hold you to that." On his way out, a group of teenagers stood near the bulletin board, looking like they'd rather be invisible. One stepped forward, tall, skinny fishing hat too big for his head. "Mr. Cole?" Jackson paused. "My dad said you fixed the dock. Told me I should thank you." Jackson gave a small smile. "Just take care of it." "We will," the boy said quickly. "Promise." Jackson walked back to his truck, a faint ease settling in his chest. Not the peace that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from being understood, even just a little. He thought again of that Saturday morning, of Susan storming toward him with her clipboard and her conclusions, of how quickly she decided who he was. He hadn't shouted, hadn't threatened. He let the truth and the law speak for him, and in the end, that had been enough. Sometimes the best way to earn respect isn't to demand it. It's to carry yourself with quiet strength, to let others catch up, and maybe, just maybe, by standing still, you make enough noise for change.